Hey guys, it's Infinite Flash here, and we're gonna start back on the Leningrad at that position that I stopped at the other day. So we're just scrolling through all the moves. Knight c3, Knight c6, and now White plays d5. And I kind of talked about, what I think about Knight a5 and why it's not the greatest move. So this kind of happens. And in this position, I mean, White has a lot of options. He can try, a move like Knight d2, protecting the pawn. He can, take here, or he can, do kind of nothing, I guess, with, a move like Queen c2, or maybe that drops the c4. Maybe those are the only two moves that I've only seen those two moves in really practice. I think Queen v3 is also a move here. So I guess I'll start off with, Knight d2, protecting the c4 pawn. And here, a lot of the time, Black just plays the c5 move. And if this pawn was back here, then this would kind of look like a Benoni, but it would look like a bad Benoni for Black. But, f5 is in, so, e4 is not in either, so it's kind of a weird King's Indian even. And in this kind of position, I mean, White doesn't want to play like a move like f4 because of Knight g4 and the e3 square is weak, and if to end up playing that kind of move, then the entire structure is kind of weak around these squares, and I think with the block center, it should be quite okay for Black. Maybe he can go a6, rook b8, and try to get b5 eventually. So, move like a4, e5. That kind of stuff is probably really, really okay for Black. And not to mention, there's also you can also move this knight eventually and try to get this bishop along this diagonal with some tactics there. That can't be bad for Black. I mean, you can also try e4, but I don't know about this kind of move. I mean, this also allows Knight d3, so I don't think White wants to do that either. It's not really that clear. If he takes this kind of position with the strong central pawns, it's probably going to be quite okay. Bishop e6, king e8, bishop g8, and then eventually Black plays e5, and when White's not ready to pounce on the square. But Black can also try to attack this pawn, and if White tries to play b3, you get this nice bishop to work with along the diagonal. So I mean, this kind of position is quite okay. So there's also this Queen b3 move that White can play, and I guess the idea is just preventing Bishop d7 or something, or if maybe c6, White can take and then maybe get this check in. Yeah, here I mean I just thought that just taking and bringing the knight back to go here would be quite okay, and sometimes White wants to prevent this. You might take here if you go Knight c5. So I mean, Black then plays this kind of weird move a6, and this is Knight b5, and kind of this reroute to d4, which controls these two squares. And I'm not really sure about the specifics, but I mean, if we make White play like a natural developing move, maybe Knight e5, and this kind of stuff with the Benoni is quite okay and acceptable for Black. I think this is quite normal. And I mean, if you take, I mean, this kind of position is pretty nice for Black. And I mean, if it wasn't for f4, I might consider b takes c6. So I mean, f4, I mean, Knight g4 is quite alright also. I mean, this kind of stuff is really, really pleasant for Black. I don't know. I mean, White probably has solid ways to develop, but I mean, Black shouldn't really have problems here in this kind of position. You can also try to get e5 at some point, or maybe if you push c5, you can also try to go for this bank go idea with a6 and b5 with this weird with a weird version of the Banco with f5 already played. It's not really clear if this is better or worse for black compared to the Banco. So, queen b3 is a interesting sideline. Not really clear at all. But most of the time white just takes here and doubles your pawns. And if you kind of think about it, you see this kind of pawn mass, and it kind of leads you to believe that maybe black wants to push on the king side here. And if you look at white's pawns, they're ready to push themselves, right? Queen b3, attacking on these light squares is also an idea. Yeah, I mean, white's ready to push on the queen side and expand there, and black's trying to expand on the queen side. This would be really similar to King's Indian if it weren't for that, oops, I was trying to think of the position. Maybe it was, never mind, ignore that, what I just did. If this wasn't, this is really similar to a King's Indian, except, there's no pawn on e4 and there's kind of this open center. So, I mean, typically, white has many kind of plans here. You can play e4, you can play like b4 and expand immediately, or you can go with, this typical idea of queen b3 and then c5 and develop really quickly. That's probably the most dangerous plan in this kind of position. So if e4, yeah, against this move, okay, you probably don't want to leave it there. This kind of pawn chain is really solid, so either you want to destroy it really fast or you want to close the position. So the move that kind of looks like that actually kind of dismantles the pawn chain is actually this f4 move. I mean, if you take, then you have this weak isolated pawn, and you don't want to do that. So normally you want to play this f4 move, and okay, I mean, if g takes, then you take with the pawn, and now your pawn structure is fixed. And if bishop takes, you take here, and this bishop's under attack. And I mean, this kind of position is quite alright for black. It's, two bishops, and you might attack the king, try to break down the pawn center with e6 at some point. I think black's doing fine here. I think I've seen white also play this move before, and you probably don't want to take this knight here. White's doing quite well with these two pass pawns with the bishops working along with that. You probably don't want to do that kind of stuff. You should probably just be more solid and take the bishop right here on g3 and develop solidly with bishop f5, rook b8 maybe to protect this weak b7 pawn. The entire position looks pretty unclear to me. It's not really been played that much. I haven't played too much of it, but I feel like black should be okay. And if white doesn't really take, if he plays like a nonchalant move like b4 continuing this plan, I mean, black's just going to play g5. And, at some point like queen e8, a6 to prevent this knight b5 move. Queen e8, play knight h here and try to push the kingside pawns, or maybe he wants to go bishop g4, queen e8, queen h5, and try to trade off the light square bishops, get a knight to g4, and go for this kind of Sicilian dragon checkmate idea. And okay, white doesn't want to allow this pawn to stay here, so yeah, usually he just takes, and we get the interesting line. So I mean, e4 is an idea, but a lot of the time white will continue with his b4 plan. And recently in a game I kind of ran into this, and I think I just played h6. White played his queen, tried to support his pawns here, and I just continued this kind of move, g5 expanding on the king side. White continues with his plan. I get out of this pin. This diagonal is really, really annoying, and d6 was a threat. And here, what did he play? I think he played rook d1 supporting his d pawn. And here I played queen e8, protecting against knight b5. And here, I mean, white can continue in a lot of ways. Probably with bishop e2 getting, his last piece out. Maybe playing rook c1 at some point. And then, or maybe instead of rook c1, maybe bishop b2, he can play a4 for his threatening knight. this knight move here, and then you have to play like a6, and white can advance pretty quickly with this king side move already. But but these kind of moves are pretty substantial. I mean, there's already this idea of knight g4, knight f2, followed by some kind of take if the queen is already on h5. That looks like a pretty dangerous attack. And white has his own play over here. He's completely dominating the queen side. At first when you look at this position, it looks like white should be totally dominating because by normal it looks nicer for white because his pawn structure is neater and all of his pieces have pretty much a role. But white's king is pretty defenseless over here on this side of the board with just the normal light squared bishop. So it's not really clear. And that's the point against like this early b4 idea, just attacking the king side. The more challenging move is probably this queen b3 move, and you can't really play normally against this move. We kind of go for the same setup with a6. White wants to play knight b5 at some point. So yeah, here a lot of the time white just continues to take space with this c5 move. And yeah, eventually he wants to play d6, so you want to get out of this pin. d6 was a threat because the queen discovered check. And here, a lot of the time white just plays this rook d1 move as we saw earlier, trying to support the d pawn, pushing that pawn further. And here, often you want to play a move like, I think, queen e8. And the idea is that, maybe you want to play your queen over here, but, against a move like knight a4, maybe you also want to play bishop d7 in this kind of position. Threatening the knight, and, this queen can't take here just yet because bishop takes knight. And I'm covering this twice, the c6 pawn push, excuse me. So that's pretty nice for black actually. White won't do that. Normally, he'll continue with like bishop d2. This bishop wasn't good at all. He wants to connect his rooks, and sometimes this bishop might come to a5 if the knight's not moving, if the knight moves. And I think sometimes in this position, black plays h6. And I'm not a big fan of this move because, knight a4. No, I think knight a4 is met. Yeah, knight a4. No, never mind. This isn't the position. I think white just plays with rook ac1 first. And then if black continues here, I'm just trying to remember. I think it's what's the move? I just remember. Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, if this knight gets here, and I don't know if I made like make a wasting move or something for black. White gets this a5 move, bishop a5, and gets this enormous pressure on the c7 pawn, and in some kind of positions, black just gives up the entire queen side. In this kind of position, goes for a full-out attack. That's always an option, but I'm a big fan of keeping material on, trying to keep, this kingside expansion still as an option. So probably not h6. Probably like a move like rook b8. And the idea of this move is, maybe I want to protect the b7 pawn if I move my bishop here. Seems fair enough to me. Rook ac1 and have this bishop d7 move. Now I'm ready to push here on the king side with my pawns, and I think this position's fairly murky. I mean, it's not really clear to me at all what's white's next move. I'm not saying there isn't one, but maybe you can't really move this knight because of bishop a4, and I mean this is what white wants to do, right? He just wants to move the knight and try to push the c6 pawn with the rook here. So I don't know, maybe a move like queen c2, to me knight b1 and c6, and I think black can already start pushing in the king side here. And I mean this kind of position is really not a problem. You can just give up the a6 pawn and try to make use of your king side group over here. I mean, you have like potentially like 9 attackers over here. Looks pretty nice for black. I mean, there hasn't been too many games played in this line. I mean, I've had to figure this out on myself, and maybe I'm not thinking of the right plan, but if you can think of your own plan, I mean, and figure it out, what's black's really best ideas, I think you should try it. I think you should just, try it for yourselves. And other than that, I mean, white setup looks very, very nice in this kind of mid line. I mean, these two pawns look nice, but it's not so clear what he should do. If white wants to bail out in this kind of position, let's go back just a couple. Okay, C1. If we play a few more moves, he plays bishop e1, getting this rook supporting it again. Bishop here. White can always try to play this d6 move and try to trade off some pawns in the center. This isn't such a bad thing for him, I think. This isn't such a bad thing for black, I mean. And you can take here, or maybe you can even push here in this kind of position, kind of blocking the queen side, and just accept this weakness. But now that the center is kind of closed, even though white has a fast pawn here, you can definitely start advancing over here. Often in kind of positions like this, even this kind of structure isn't so bad. But I guess in this instance, white has annoying pressure against the queen side, so maybe it's not ideal here. But in a lot of positions, white wants to play that kind of move. But other than that, I mean, this kind of variation with knight e5 is, I think it's very, very, playable for black. Maybe people don't play it because of an idea that I haven't found, or a setup that white can play that I haven't found that makes this kind of bad, but I haven't found it yet. So, I mean, eventually I want to be shown why this is not a good move, but as of yet, I haven't found it. So, I hope you liked the video. Give me some constructive criticism why you didn't like it. Thanks for watching, guys.